What was the hardest piece of news you've had to tell someone? After my parents split up, my dad moved us with his mother. She was one of those grandmas who woke up every morning to get my siblings and I up for school because my dad left for work at 4 a.m. and worked 12-hour days usually. One day she didn't wake us up. Just as I was coming out of my room, I saw my younger, 4 years, and I was 17, coming out of her room. We just kind of looked at each other and had an oh crap moment. I went in to check on Grandma. She was cold. So I called 911 and then had to call Dad. And that was hard. And because he worked about 30 minutes away, this was the 90s, so cell phones weren't that common yet, I had to call all the aunts and uncles too, and then dig out Grandma's DNR from where Dad told me it was and hand it to the EMTs that showed up. So it was definitely the 7 worst calls of my life so far. Story 2. When I was 22, my parents asked me to come home and watch my grandma, who had dementia and needed a caregiver, while they went to visit my brother who was living out of the country. 2 days in, my grandma died in her sleep. Not only did I have to deal with being the person who found my grandma dead by myself, but then had to call all of my various family members, parents, aunts, brothers, to let them know what happened. Edit. I wanted to thank everyone for your kind words and condolences. It's been 10 years since my grandma died, so this is not something I'm grieving over anymore. I will say to the many people who have mentioned being in similar situations, talk to your family, a friend, or someone you trust about any and all feelings you have about an experience like this. For way too many years, yes years, I blamed myself for my grandma's death and carried it around like a shameful secret. It wasn't until I felt brave enough to tell my mom how I felt that she provided the appropriate perspective and support I needed to finally move on and make peace with that life experience. Story 3. Telling my dad that my mom was cheating on him. I had evidence and everything, pictures, witnesses, even names and references. The guy had a family with kids and everything, and they practically gave me a lot of info. After a year, my dad is low-key mad at me for telling him, and my mom doesn't trust me anymore since Dad stated where he got the info, even when I told him not to tell Mom where he got it from. So now I'm the bad guy and a black sheep of the family. They got back together now, and they bully me to get their way. My mom still cheats, but I'm not telling Dad anymore, because it'll be my fault. Right now, I'm debating to tell Dad because ever since my mom started cheating, my allowance kept going down and down and down because she goes drinking often and Dad doesn't know since he's abroad working. What should I do? I'm a third-year college student and want to move out of this mess with my younger brother and sister. So are we saying the allowance goes back up if you spill the beans? Because if so, I mean, what a trade, right? You get to have the feeling of being morally correct, doing the technical right thing, and you get paid for it? Come on, that's freaking great. I mean, it's awesome that you're getting any allowance as a junior in college. However, I will say, what impact does the mother have on your tuition? Is she covering college at all? Will that hurt you? Regardless, as much as I think it's a good idea to, share with your dad, he probably already knows, and even if they get back together or apart or do whatever, it sounds like they're not treating you all that well. So I'd say prioritize you and your family first. You're the best. Good luck out there. Story 4. I worked in pediatric psychology for a while in graduate school, PhD clinical psychology. This invoked providing psychological services for all children in the hospital. One of my very first weeks, I was shadowing a more experienced fellow, and we encountered a family whose child, 7-year-old female, was hospitalized after she was in a car accident with her father. Her father died in the accident, and no one in her family was comfortable directly explaining this to the child. They had used a lot of religious euphemisms about death. He's watching over you in heaven, he's with you in spirit, but this language is not concrete enough for a young child who doesn't really understand death. Sitting with this child, body brace, lacerations all over, very flat effect, and explaining to her what death was, that her father had died, and having to ask questions to make sure she understood was one of the most traumatizing experiences of my graduate training. I can still vividly imagine her face while we were telling her and the tears silently rolling down her face. Story 6. I had to tell my mom that Dad died, her husband of 45 years. Dad wasn't feeling good. He had a bit of a cough on a Sunday morning, so he didn't go to church with my mom. Mom called me on the way to church to see if I'd go check on Dad. I mean, no problem, right? Old man and I will watch some war movies or something. I get to the house and Dad has more than a bit of a cough. It's like full-blown pneumonia. He asks for a blanket, which I grab. He doesn't want to watch a show or anything, so I play with the dog a bit and let him run around their massive yard. When I come back in, Dad asks for a breathing treatment. He has COPD, so he had albuterol treatments. I grab the treatment, but when I hand it to him, I realize he has blue lips. I pick him up, I tell him we're going to the ER. We make it to the front door and he grabs the door handle and he won't let go. He slumps down and stares at me. I tell him I love him and he blurts out, I love, and then he died. I call 911 while doing CPR, but I already knew what had happened. 10 years as a paramedic and I had failed my dad. I failed to see the signs before my very eyes. I called Mom to get home ASAP. She was picking us up a pizza. I begged the paramedics to transport my dad even though they had every right to call it on scene. I didn't want Mom to see Dad like this. So Mom gets home and I have to tell her. I've told families that I'll do everything I can to save their dead baby. I've had to answer questions from parents that were burnt severely that were still looking for their child in their fully engulfed house. I've even had to deal with family members showing up on a scene and seeing their teenage daughter headless in a driver's seat of an accident. But this was the worst. I wake up screaming in my sleep often now. It was bad before and it's been 2 years now since I failed my dad. But now it's an almost every night event. So yeah, story 7. My lifelong best friend died suddenly at 35. It was just a few days before he was supposed to get married to a girl he had been with for 10 years and who had wanted to marry for years, but they couldn't quite pull it off. He survived a near-death experience a few years earlier, and he made it out to all of us that things were okay, so none of us expected that he was in any danger. A surgery could have prevented the heart failure he suffered, but he could not afford this being out of work at the time and without insurance. I was the first to know among our friends. It fell to me to tell them. He was the best of us, in an eerie mirror of how we met each friend since childhood. I had to progress through the list, calling each, telling them of this unspeakable tragedy. I relived the years as we met everyone, every good memory now agonizing. This friend was a homebody, and so we took for granted that he was okay, and never really forced him to come hang out with everybody like we probably should have. So ultimately he got a few extra years with him that we didn't utilize well, because he did such a good job of making us all believe everything was okay. And we thought it was all behind him. It's been a few years now since he's been gone, but I still miss him every day. All I could say to any of them was, he's gone. People afterward said, I'm sorry for your loss, I'm so sorry, and I always corrected them. Losing him was everyone's loss. Story 8. When I was 13, I'd come home from school, and I was the first one home. I spotted a trail of blood leading up the pavement. I thought nothing of it until I realized it led into my garden and around the back of the house. Ran inside and found the trail leading upstairs to my sister's bedroom where I found our dog, a 4-year-old black Labrador, dead, covered in blood, and clearly had been in a lot of pain. My neighbor came running behind me, explaining that Max had gotten out of the back somehow and took himself for a walk where he got hit by a car. He managed to drag himself home and curled up on my sister's bed. The driver had followed him and tried knocking on our door, but no one was home, so explained what had happened to a neighbor. Me and my neighbor cleaned the blood from around our house and garden. Had to call my mom and dad to tell them that they came home as quick as they could, but my sister, 8 years old at the time, came home before then, and I had to explain why she couldn't go in her room. She ended up sleeping in my room for weeks. Story 9. 2 days after Christmas, my dad called me at work to tell me he had liver cancer. He had maybe 6 months. Most of my family lives here in San Diego. He had moved to Louisiana. He had already told my older brother. He told me he hadn't called my younger sister yet. I forget if I had volunteered or if he asked, but my brother and I told my sister, and the 3 of us told our mom. They had divorced. My sister had a hard time. My mom, who was usually very bitter about my dad, was surprisingly supportive. She told us how sad she was that we were losing our father and brought out some pictures of him. The hardest person I had to tell was my wife. I called her on my way home after hearing about it from my dad. You see, I was strong for my sister. I was strong for my mom. I was strong at the funeral, but my wife was the person who was strong for me. She got me through the worst day. I broke when I told her, and she put me back together. The day of the funeral, my brother and I folded his flag and presented it to my stepmom at the funeral. My dad had way too much fun in the army. My dad had an honorable discharge, but just barely, so he was eligible for a flag, but not to have flag folded and presented or taps to be played. My family is a proud Hispanic family. My dad was born in Texas and spent lots of his life in California. He had requested a mariachi for his funeral. Bring in North Louisiana. The closest one we found came from Dallas. 3-hour drive away. After my brother and I presented the flag, the mariachi asked me why there weren't any soldiers to give the flag. I told him how my dad had some misadventures in the army, and he kind of just said, oh well, and walked off. A minute later, the mariachi was playing taps. My dad would have liked that. Story 10. While my mother was in the hospital, her mother died. For 2 days, we had to keep it a secret from her. Although she wasn't healthy enough, my father had to convince her doctor to let her out. The doctor agreed, but we had to sign a waiver stating that if anything went wrong as a complication of her condition, it wouldn't be the hospital's responsibility. He figured it would be worse for her if she wouldn't be able to attend her mother's wake, since his mother died while he was working abroad with no means to come back home. Anyway, we lied to my mother until we got home. We told her the doctor said she's okay now and just take some rest and the prescribed medicine. My father couldn't tell her the bad news, so I was the one to break it to her. It was so sad, and we all started crying. The same night we drove to my grandparents for the wake. Thankfully, nothing went wrong with my mother's early release, by the way. Story 11. One of my good friends unalived himself when I was in high school. He had been missing all day, and our classmates were finally let out of school at 3 p.m. after getting approval from local law enforcement to come assist in the search efforts. I come from a very small town, and that afternoon the entire town headed out to my friend's home, which was way out in the woods. Shortly after, my mom and I got to my friend's property and started a slow crawl through the woods to look for any signs of my friend. We heard a terrible scream echo through the trees. My friend had been found, dead, and brought back to the house. We heard his mom's realization. I was numb, with my mom sobbing beside me and people moving past me in a blur. A bunch of us just sort of collapsed on the front yard as we kept hearing my friend's mom's scream ringing out from the garage where my friend was brought out from the woods by the police. My buddy, Austin, was driving out to the house with his whole family to help the search efforts. He called me 20 minutes later after I had found out about my friend to ask where they should park. I had to tell him and his whole family on speakerphone that our friend was dead. That month and the following events was a confusing mess for me. Story 12. This woman and her husband come to the Genius Bar. They look depressed, like someone just died. They can't turn on their computer after they spilled some wine on it. As the husband starts telling me what's wrong, his wife breaks down in tears. He tells me that their only daughter just died in some awful way. We pretty much had carte blanche at the time, so I cover the cost of the repair because I felt so bad. I go back and pull their hard drive, so at least they'll have their information while I wait for the parts. Click, click, click. There's nothing that we can do about that in the store. I like to be proactive, so before I talk to the customer, I tell my manager what's about to go down. I tell her I think we should cover the cost of a data recovery since we frequently recommend it if they take the news like I expect they will. My manager was standing next to me as I told them, and the moment I said, "So I pulled the hard drive," the mother broke down in tears. My manager covered data recovery services on the spot. We made explicitly clear that it wasn't a sure thing, but it was the best chance we had. Fast forward a few weeks, we get the hard drive back in the store from the company. They couldn't get anything off of it either. When they picked it up, I told them the news. It was so much worse than the emotional outburst. It was just nothing. Like they've had so much pain in their lives recently that they couldn't feel it anymore. So that was a fun conversation. There's a similar story with a woman whose phone was borked after a car crash killed her husband on their honeymoon. She brought me her phone in 24 pieces and she didn't have any backups. That wasn't nearly as difficult though because there were 0 chances we were getting those photos back. With this couple, it felt like I kept yanking the rug out from under them the entire time I helped them. Story 13. One day after school, my 5th grade daughter walked home with her best friend. She turned south at our corner to go home. He continued east towards his house. He never made it. He stepped in front of a truck without looking when he was crossing the main road into town and he died on the street. Her dad and I had just told her and her sister 2 weeks prior that we were divorcing. That night, after news had spread and it was confirmed, we had to sit her down again at her dad's and tell her her best friend had died. When we told her what happened, she mentioned that he had been pretty careless about watching where he was going lately, and she had recently grabbed his backpack and shied at him for almost walking into a street light pole. I've been to some really tragic funerals, but that one was the hardest. I live in small town USA, and it was heart-wrenching watching that 5th grade class all at the front, together comforting each other while us parents sat further back, watching our babies grow up in such a horrible way. It was rough. I've never been more heartbroken for and proud of a group of small-town 11-year-olds. In related news, my kids have a phenomenal therapist and an incredibly healthy outlook on life. They are the best. Story 14. I'm a nurse, so I have a few, but this one stuck with me the most. This happened about 6 months ago. A patient in a single room, lovely lady, about 50 or 60 with cancer, with a loving family, and I had had her in my care for about a month. And a few beds over in another room was a very nice gentleman in his 60s who had been in for a few weeks with pain management issues. Now, this gentleman would visit the lady every day for the last few weeks since he was admitted, and I thought to myself, wow, that guy made a friend really quick here. And at the same time, the lady and her family would visit the gentleman in his room throughout his stay too. Then comes the last day of the month. I just picked up an overtime shift as the night shift was down one nurse and I was allowed to keep my patients from the afternoon shift. And through the night, I kept an eye on the lady since throughout my afternoon shift she had shown signs of her health rapidly deteriorating. Then, at the stroke of midnight, she passed away. Immediately called the family to come see one last time. We're not allowed to say that a patient had passed away on the phone to the next of kin or had caused more problems on the way. We usually say that there's been a crisis with so-and-so and need you to come immediately to the hospital. Family come and they cry and mourn for their lost and eventually go through the procedure with the family, what happens next once they had passed on, and then they left, only leaving a few forgotten belongings in the room which we had bagged up and left in a storeroom for families to come collect later on. I finished my overtime shift and told them that I'll be back for my Saturday afternoon shift later, went home and rested. While at home resting, I'm thinking, what am I going to tell the gentleman if he starts asking? And then fell asleep until I returned to the ward, and as I put my stuff away, there he was. The gentleman as I see him in his pajamas standing outside the room. I was ready to speak to the gentleman about what to say about the lady that passed away, and as I struck a conversation, "Are we all right, sir? Looking for a friend?" Then what he said next I wasn't prepared for, as he told me, "Actually, I was wondering if my sister got transferred somewhere else. I couldn't see her yesterday since I was stuck with the drips all day." I wasn't ready to find that out, and had to find out somehow, so I looked for the contact details for the gentleman's next of kin and for the ladies as well, and I find that the next of kin, they both had the same last name, and thought it was a coincidence, but it bugged me that they might be related, and the gentleman had no medical history of dementia or confusion, so I rung the number and to my surprise confirmed that they were brother and sister, and had completely forgotten to be informed of during last night. I asked if they would like me to tell the gentleman now, actually brother, about his sister, or would they want to call him, and asked me to tell him before they came to see him and collect the rest of his sister's belongings. So I went back to the gentleman and had asked him to come with me to our ward's tiny meeting room, shut the door and sat him down, took a deep breath, and I told him everything. Tears came down the wrinkled gentleman's face, and as I sat next to him to empathize with him, I knew that he was really hurting inside, as he never saw her just that one last time. I told him that the family would be back to collect other things and come see him. He thanked me for taking the time to tell him and for caring for his sister until the very end. I then took him back to his room until the family arrived again and took him down to the morgue to see her one last time. Story 15. I didn't actually say the words. I just couldn't. And it still haunts me. My grandma was dying, and we all knew it. She was doped up and basically unconscious. I was 16 and a screwed up kid. My grandma had been complaining to me for quite some time that I never told her I loved her like I did when I was little. I grew up in a family with a lot of conflict and parental alienation going both ways. It simply was not safe to love anyone. If I loved my mom, then I was betraying my dad. If I loved my dad, I betrayed my mom. If my brother loved my dad, I couldn't love him anymore because then I was betraying them both. But I could always love Grandma. She wasn't part of the mess, but by the time I was 16, I was so confused about life and family that I could no longer say the words. Not even to my grandma on her deathbed. I went there specifically to tell her that I love her, and I couldn't do it. She died the next day. This happened a couple weeks after Valentine's Day. My grandma had given me a card. It was back in the day when a card was folded into like quarters so you could unfold it into a whole sheet of paper. After her death, I was fiddling with the card and unfolded it. My grandma had unfolded the whole card and written on the very inside, my grandson said it without ever using the words, "I love you, Grandma." It has been 39 and a half years and I still cannot tell that story without crying. How did she know? How did she know how much I needed to hear that? How did she know how lonely I was, how badly I needed to love my family but I couldn't? God, what a gift she gave me in that simple card. I knew I was at least a little bit okay and not a total piece of crap, and I knew I needed to learn how to say those most important words again. She deserved to hear them, and I needed to find my way to being able to love again. I still have that card, and it is one of my most prized possessions. I haven't looked at it in years, but I know exactly where it is. I still have problems trusting people, and my family is still screwed up. But I tell them all I love them now. Even if the other one can hear me, I don't care. The courage that took at first. I made sure my kids were comfortable saying those words, and we never leave or hang up the phone without them. I may have said it in my own way without any words before, but guess what, Grandma? I love you. Oh, dude, I don't mean to be unprofessional, okay? So if my voice is breaking a lot during this, it's just, some of these are getting me, man. Story 16. The worst thing for me when I was 15. I've been struggling with a huge disturbing realization that I'd been essayed by a neighbor when I was 5. I was in full-on trash my room rage when my brother, 21 then, came into the house and asked what was going on. I broke down and told him, but it was a scary thing for me to say to him because his best friend at the time was my abuser's grandson. They lived in the same house. Then my dad came home from work and saw us talking and the mess I was in and asked what was going on, so I told him too. His reaction was a mix of devastation and rage. It was one of the toughest days of my teens. It took a while to convince my dad that what happened wasn't his fault. He blamed himself for not being a better parent, but honestly, he's been an amazing dad and he's been through so much too. But I know it still upsets him a lot that it happened to me. My abuser was old at that time and was dying from a long, horrible, and painful cancer battle. He had also went blind. I didn't go to the police because I knew his time was almost over and I felt that karma was getting him back for everything he'd done. When he died, I peed on his grave. I'm 39 now and still not over it. I don't think I ever could be. But I take comfort from the fact that that guy's rotting in hell. Story 17. Kind of a long story, but bear with me. When I was in college, I had to go to the bank to deposit a check. Normally, I used the ATM, but there was an issue with how the check was filled out, and I wanted to talk to someone to see if I needed it reissued or not. The man came in and robbed the bank at gunpoint, fleeing with less than $700 and being caught less than 15 minutes later. From the point of the guy tapping me on the shoulder with his gun to a few weeks later, I was numb with shock and basically on autopilot. I managed to explain what happened to detectives and then fabricate a story in my mind about the robber that he was on hard times, he didn't hurt anyone, my wallet was on the counter and he didn't take it, so he only took from the insured bank. He can't be that bad of a guy, right? A year later, I was subpoenaed to testify against him. His defense was that the gun was a non-functioning antique, so nobody in the bank was ever afraid of it. The prosecutor explained to me that the robber had gambled away his family's money and his wife was taking their kids and leaving them for someone living 300 miles away. In the robber's vehicle was found a duffel bag full of boxes of bullets and directions to this guy's house 300 miles away, implying the robber had intent to hurt someone that day. And it was revealed that he had a self-unaliving plot in mind. When the prosecutor and detective told me about the robber's "nobody was scared" defense, it took all I had to hold back my tears. The carefully formulated story of this guy down on his luck who didn't and wouldn't hurt anybody fell apart, and I finally had to feel the anxiety and fear that I had held back for the past year. You see, when I was young, my mother worked at a convenience store that was robbed. When the guy's face covering fell, she was kidnapped and unalived. The guy went on to kill others as he fled across 4 states to evade the cops. And the entire time I was on the floor of that bank, that is all I thought about. How I actually would end up like my mother. I grew up never talking about it with anyone, and it was always kind of a dirty secret that I never shared. I shared it with the detective and prosecutor through a few tears because the defense of "nobody was scared" was absolute effing bullcrap. When they put me on the stand the next day and showed me the video from the bank that day, suddenly all of that fear came rushing back, and I couldn't compose myself. I never had such difficulty telling someone something, and just thinking about this again has me crying. Story 18. Telling my father I had cancer. Mom was okay, my sister was okay, my first wife was okay. But my dad, I rang him at work, got one of the boys. He repairs industrial machines at a food packaging plant. Told him I needed to talk urgently, and he needed to get my old man. Now this guy, let's call him Steve, knew I wasn't jerking his chain, as the only times I'd ever called Dad were when it was important. Fast forward 5 minutes, Dad, understandably gruff with being interrupted at work, is on the phone. I tell him I have cancer. Silence. Massive bang. People screaming. Steve is back on the phone. "Mate, what effing news did you tell your dad? He just fainted. We have to go, we're getting him to the hospital." Told him, and he chastised me for not giving a heads up in case exactly what happened, someone could stand with him. Dad's all good now, but apparently when they got him to the hospital, they thought he was mentally traumatized from hitting his head, as he just would not speak, laid there and sobbed for hours and hours. This was the hardest my old man, the rock of the family, never really showing emotion, and this hit him like a road train. On that note, nut cancer. I had 6 months of chemo in 2014. Yeah, I lost the nut, but I cleared 5 years last week. Story 19. I've had to deal with worse, like telling people about my mom having cancer, but I recently changed jobs. I went from working at a small institution where I was recognized as a pretty influential figure and hard worker, someone people could go to if they didn't know who else to go to. I inherited a lot of responsibilities that nobody else knew how to do, and I ended up earning more of them because people would come to me with problems nobody could resolve, and I'd look up documentation and try to sort it out. Then I would de facto take over those processes. I got a job offer at a place that pays about 150% of my old salary, with fewer job responsibilities. And the job offer was so soon I had no time to tell anyone I was leaving or anything. I barely had time to finish up work on some projects before I left. My wife still works there, and every time I see people there, they say either, "Oh, hey, I wanted to come talk to you about something the other day," and then I have to break it to them that I don't work there anymore. Or people who already know see me and say solemnly, "You're so missed here." One lady actually started crying. We only worked together, only occasionally and never closely, but I helped her when I could and we got along well. When I told her I wasn't there anymore, tears started coming from her eyes and she kept trying to wipe them away and hide them. Every time I see anyone there and it comes up, I feel like I got punched in the gut. I worked hard to build a good reputation for myself there. I never really thought people would care if I left. Story 20. The first patient I had to tell them that they likely had cancer. At the time, I was a newly minted intern in internal medicine. I'd graduated medical school 6 weeks ago. It was my first week of post-grad training, aka residency. Think JD in the first episode of Scrubs. I had no effing clue how to go about being a doctor, is what I'm saying. She was a middle-aged lady who came into the ER where I was spending my first month in residency because she was feeling short of breath and told me her voice had changed and she was tired. Other than being a longtime smoker, she didn't really have many health problems and honestly didn't even want to come to the ER, but her daughters made her. Her labs were pretty normal, same for the physical exam, but her voice was definitely hoarse. I was concerned enough with the shortness of breath plus hoarse voice to get a chest x-ray. What greeted me, plus a ton of scattered little spots everywhere, it's impossible to say without biopsy and more scans, but more than a 95% chance that's advanced stage metastatic cancer. So on my third day as a big boy doctor, I got to hand this sweet lady a death sentence in front of her daughters. I felt like I was going to throw up, but with a little gentle prompting from my attending, I sat down with her and her family and went through what was happening and why. I drew them a crappy little diagram on a sheet of printer paper to show why her voice had changed. Told them the only way to say 100% this is cancer is to have a pathologist look at a piece of tissue, but that we were pretty certain based on her imaging and history. Explained the way forward, biopsy, seeing oncology, etc. She was like a rock. Very minimal reaction, asked a few questions to clarify, but mostly just nodded. She was a very no-nonsense lady, and I don't think she was in shock or anything. She just wanted to get straight to the point and get moving. I made sure she had contact info for the oncology office and our clinic. When we left the room, I was still shaking. My attending told me I had done a really excellent job, and I remember being both elated and disgusted at the same time. Confirming that I did well was exciting and gratifying, but at the same time, nauseating. I had in essence told that woman that she was dying. Is that really something I want to be good at? It stuck with me for a long time. I had dreams about that conversation. I've since had to have a lot more difficult and disturbing ones, but that early one has always stuck with me the most, and my reaction to that attending's praise. The patient ultimately elected for care and hospice and passed a few months later, hopefully comfortably. Almost a year later, I still think about her often. I can picture her face down to the last detail if I close my eyes. Story 21. Having to tell my best friend's mom her son died in my arms. I lived in the heart of Las Vegas from 6 to 16 and saw plenty of things no kid should. I met a kid 1 month after moving there with my dad, and we were best friends from then on, and being an only child, he was a brother to me. We were 15, and it was about 2 weeks before Christmas break. I usually left to California for breaks because family issues. It was a little after 9 p.m. and we both had to go home, but we lived in separate apartment complexes. But they were across the street from each other, so we would always walk to the bus stop, hang out a little bit more, and then split up. This night, there was about 3 or 4 men at the bus stop, so we decided to split up sooner instead. I want to say about not even a minute or two after I jumped over my apartment complex wall to get in, I heard car brakes hit hard, yelling, then maybe 10 seconds of shooting. I was terrified and I ran to the apartment. I didn't give it any mind until I closed the door and actually thought about my friend. I ran back outside and actually went to the front of the complex this time to peek around and make sure nothing was going on. I saw 2 men at the bus station laying on the ground. Dead, I know now, and one more body like 10 feet away from the bus station. To this day, I don't know what made me, my 15-year-old terrified self, want to go look, but I did. I saw the 2 guys closer. One was shot 4 times and the other about 4 to 5 times. As I walked over to the other body, I saw it was my best friend, hit 2 times, one in his arm and one in his chest. I sat there and held him for what feels like an eternity until I heard sirens and lights snapped me out of it. I still don't know how it happened or why he was so close. The police would go on to say it was just a casualty from a stray bullet. They took my shirt and pants as evidence and escorted me home to change, since I lived right behind the scene. After changing, I went through the basic police questioning and was told to come down to the station the next day after I've calmed and could tell them more. I asked if they contacted his mom yet, and they said they were in process of identifying them first, then notify the next of kin. The next day, after getting no sleep, I went over to where my friend lived and knocked on the door, and when his mom answered, we both broke down. She knew he was gone, but I told her he didn't die alone, at least not without someone by his side. I'm 24 now, and it still feels like it happened just yesterday, especially writing it out now. Story 22. I was the primary caregiver for my aunt while she battled colorectal cancer. She was only 42, and my cousins were 17 and 13. She fought for about 3 years, and towards the end she knew the prognosis was bad, but was confident she would see at least one of her sons graduate high school. As the cancer took over, she ended up in the ICU often. The last time she was in the hospital, the doctor came in for the 5 a.m. rounds. My aunt was sleeping peacefully, so the doctor called my uncle and me out into the hall. He told us she had maybe a week left, and that it was time for hospice and funeral preparations. Graduation was only 2 months out, and I knew my aunt would be devastated that she wouldn't be there, but it was time for hospice, so she would have to be informed. My uncle and I spoke in the hall after the doctor left. He said he would tell my aunt while I went home to get my cousins and my son ready for school and breakfast and car rides. Not even 10 minutes after I left, my uncle called, crying, said he couldn't do it and he wanted me to come back and tell her myself. I turned around and went back. When I walked in, my aunt was already very upset that the doctor talked to us without her. She demanded to know exactly what was said. I told her I would call the doctor back in so he could answer all of her questions, but she wanted to know then and there. So as gently as I could, I explained to her that it was time for hospice. It was awful. I've never seen someone so upset in my entire life. She was so angry and sad and said it wasn't fair. I honestly can't remember all of it after that because I've blocked it out. After all of that, I still had to go get the kids and act like everything was just fine until the right time came for us to explain it to all of them. Cancer sucks. I hate it so much. I miss her every day still, and it was 3 years ago now. She didn't get to see either of her sons graduate or go to prom. Story 23. When I got to work, my colleague or friend was in tears, panicking as her husband hasn't come home from work on the Friday. She couldn't get a hold of him. His phone was off. It wasn't unusual for him to go to work and pull an all-nighter at work, then come home the next morning, but not hearing from him at all was worrying. We called his work. They informed us that he hasn't been into work the Thursday or the Friday. Me and a lot of other people called every hospital, police station, and medical aid. The one police station said he was locked up there. We assumed he might have been locked up for speeding, and we were relieved. Thank goodness nothing tragically happened, am I right? When we got to the police station, they had no idea who we were talking about. They assumed the one guy in lockup was who we were looking for. Back to square one. Where is he? We have a lot of clients and managed to get a hold of someone high up in the police through one of our clients. He informed us that there was an accident involving 2 motorcycles and a SUV with a trailer. He told us the one biker died and the other one is okay, but he would have to get back to us on more details if the registration plate matched the one we provided. We decided to keep this info from my colleague and friend until we knew what the facts were. 2 hours later, we got confirmation. It was him that passed away. We had to tell her that it was him. The screaming, the crying, collapsing that followed still haunts me. To this day, she hasn't been contacted by any police officer to be informed about his passing. It has been 7 months. Story 24. I rented a room in a house with a half-family, half-tenant setup. The landlord's adult son had just landed an amazing job but wasn't able to secure a nearby affordable condominium that was pet-friendly, so he had to leave his 2 dogs behind. They were strays that he rescued with his now ex-girlfriend, and they were the greatest thing to come from that relationship. They raised them and made them a part of their family, and he saw these dogs as his own kids. It broke his heart he couldn't take them with him, but he didn't have a choice. He decided to spend a year in the condominium while saving up enough money to get a place he can take his dogs. And he did. He found a great complex that was still close-ish to work, huge, wide-open, fenced-off, grassy area where he could let the dogs run around all afternoon. It was great. He was just a month away from moving in when tragedy struck. At our house, a utility worker left the side gate open. The side gate is supposed to always be closed. We put large rocks on both sides of it to make it clear that gate wasn't to be used, but he moved the rocks anyway and opened the gate as far as he could. My landlord caught it, closed the gate, put the rocks back in place, and told him not to do that. She instructed him to use the front entrance and keep the gate closed so the dogs don't get out. But this a-hole didn't care. He moved the rocks again and left it wide open on his next day in, completely ignoring her. Of course, one of the dogs got out. The dog's maiden voyage sprinting into independent life didn't even get her halfway across the street. I discovered the dog's remains while pulling in, just after the utility worker had left, and notified my landlord. I collected her remains, then on impulse decided to call my old roommate. I don't know why. I should have let my landlord do it because she was my old roommate's mother. She would have been a better voice for him to hear, but I wasn't thinking properly at the time. Looking back, I definitely could have said it better. I knew he loved his dogs, but I never fully understood how deep a love between a person and their dog goes. But I got a first-hand lesson that day. I'll never forget just hearing his voice crack the way it did and listening to his whole life come crashing down around him. He was doing all of this saving so his dogs could be happy and be with him and they could have each other. And now his little family, his happy little family, reminder of better days with a girl he still deeply loved, was broken. It was all gone. After a couple of minutes, incoherent mumblings and noise, he takes a deep breath and says the only clear words on that call: "I'm coming over." He arrived 30 minutes later, completing what is usually a 45-minute drive when going legal speeds. Yeah, he was frantic, and he hadn't calmed down at all since the call. He had gotten worse. First thing he did was he went to the side gate and started screaming, "Who moved the rocks? Who moved the effing rocks?" That was when we discovered what happened, that we had been dismissed and the utility worker used the gate again anyway. Except he tried to cover up his tracks by putting the rocks back, but didn't put them back in the right place. A-hole didn't want to walk an extra 30 feet around through the house and got our dog killed to save 20 seconds. I feel bad for the customer support rep at the utility company who received his phone call. He was making all sorts of insane threats of lawsuits and pressing charges at the top of his lungs. He was hurling insults, profanities, basically anything that falls barely shy of justifying a call to the FBI. I've never seen anyone this angry. Yeah, definitely not going to ask him to take a customer survey at the end of this one. Thing is, we just told him utility worker must have opened the gate. We didn't even tell him we already reprimanded the a-hole earlier for leaving. He just flat out ignored us. If we told him that, he wouldn't have made a phone call, he would have made a headline. Story 25. During a deployment to Iraq, a group of middle school kids stepped on an IED. I was a medic and was called to the scene. 3 of the kids were brought to us in the back of a pickup truck. They teach us to triage and focus our attention where it can do the most good. One of the kids was barely breathing but had an injury that was fatal. I focused my and my Marine's attention on the other 2. We finally got a heli to take the 2 kids, leaving the worst one behind who had already passed by the time it got there. Turns out the driver of the pickup was the father of the deceased kid. He was crying and kept asking me something. Our interpreter translated, "What about mine? What about mine?" I sat there in shock for a few moments, looking around to my Marines for help on how to answer this man. The only thing I could think of was to say was, "I'm so sorry," while covering his son with a blanket that we found in his truck earlier. After about 10 minutes of the man weeping over his son, the rest of us watching teary-eyed, he approached me with our interpreter. He thanked me and said he saw how hard we worked on the other 2. He said he understood the decisions we had to make and told me not to feel bad. We then escorted him and his son back to his home. Very surreal experience for me. Definitely forces you into all the what-if scenarios where you replay if you could have done anything different. I know now that I couldn't have, but it haunted me for a while. Story 26. I had to tell my family that my grandma had died. My dad and I went to where she lived. My aunt was taking care of her, and when we got there, she was really cold and she felt sick. After some time, we took her to the hospital. I was holding her. She was 80 and couldn't move very well. She was cold, really cold. When we were going to the hospital, she kept saying, "I'm going to die. I'm going to die. Please don't let me die. Please don't let me die. I don't want to die." When we finally got to the hospital after the longest 5 minutes of my life, she was even colder, and we took her straight to the main aisle. The thing was, I lived in a small town in Brazil at the time, and the medics were doing something else, and we started to scream for them. My dad was panicking, and he just howled, "Please, somebody, Mom is going to die. A doctor, please, somebody, come help me." And an assistant doctor or something appeared out of somewhere, and then came the moment that I will never forget. She looked straight in my dad's eyes. I was behind him, so I saw it all, and said, "Why didn't you become a doctor? He's a teacher. If you had become a doctor, I wouldn't have had to die." And then came the moment that I will never forget. She looked straight in my dad's eyes. I was behind him, so I saw it all, and said, "Why didn't you become a doctor? If you had become a doctor, I wouldn't have to die. Please don't let me die. I don't want to die." And then, for the first time in my life, I saw somebody die. Her eyes just lost focus. She started looking to the ground, and quite literally, it was like the shine from her eyes was gone. My dad was really cold and calculating at that moment, so he brought her to the paramedics, and they tried to resurrect her because there wasn't any more staff, so my dad had to hold her so they could use the defibrillator. I don't know how it's pronounced, and they tried for 15 minutes or so. And Dad gave me his phone and told me to tell the family to come here. So I messaged the family groups telling them Grandma was very sick and that they should come to the city hospital right now. As soon as I finished sending, Dad came out of the medical room and just said, "Mom died," and took the phone from my hand and sent, "Mom died." Afterwards, I had to answer everybody calling. Nobody quite believed she was gone. They were like, "Did she really die?" And I had to answer them all. I was 14, almost 2 years ago now. It was really hard, but I was surprised with how cold I was. I guess I took from my pops. Then I went to watch Infinity War, and Spider-Man said the same thing as her. I was the same way that night. I didn't even cry, not even at Spider-Man. I just looked cold. Story 27. Let me start out by saying my mother and I have never been close. My dad died of self-unaliving when I was very young, and within the same year, my sister was killed in a drunk driving accident. She was not the driver. My mother remarried to an abusive alcoholic 2 years later. She refused to acknowledge my PTSD that developed due to my stepdad essaying me through much of my childhood. Refused to support me when I came out as LGBT, I'm not going to specify which, and shamed me for grieving when I went through a really bad breakup. We'd been dating for 4 years. I hope you can see why going to her about anything personal would be difficult for me. About a year ago, my PTSD was hitting me something awful. My depression was at an all-time low, and that was when my partner broke up with me. I had to sit down and tell my mother that I was wanting to self-unalive, and if she didn't take me to a hospital, that there was a very high chance I'd unalive myself. It's the first time in my life that she took me seriously. I was committed for a week, put on some new meds, and I'm doing better now. We're still not close, and we never will be, but bearing myself to her when she's pretty much never been there for me was terrifying. And I can't imagine how difficult it was for her to hear when she'd already lost my dad and my sister, and I'm the only child she has left. Story 28. Actually, I think the hardest thing was trying to explain to my kids what had happened to their daddy. My bipolar kid had to be picked up from school and taken to daycare. He was convinced the bus was going to go the wrong way, and he refused to get on it. So I called my husband since I was at work and he was home to see if he would do it. He answered the phone and said he was still sleeping and would have to get up, shower, etc. I got upset, but didn't tell him I was upset. Told him I'd take care of it and took my lunch break to go do it. I had just dropped my kid off at the daycare when my phone rang. I was in a drive-thru and we weren't supposed to be spending money, so I let it go to voicemail while I parked. My phone rang again and I answered. It was the police, saying he was in an ambulance with a gunshot wound. He'd accidentally shot himself and they made it out like it was no big deal. He was fine. But once I got to the hospital, I found out it was an inch from his heart and he had massive amounts of internal issues. There's a million layers to the story and this isn't the place to go into them, but the gist of it is he's an effing moron. And he's fine now. I honestly don't remember what I told my kids at first, but Daddy being in the hospital, I know it wasn't that he shot himself. They didn't find that out until he came back home and my father-in-law said, "So this is the medicine that goes on the bullet wound, right?" Facepalm. The panic on my oldest face when he registered what had been said was heartbreaking, to say the least. Story 29. When I was a first year in primary school, I'd walk to school with a friend in the same year that lives a few flats down and her older brother. He was the typical older brother that was protective of her from others and would always pick on her. One week my friend had a cold and got to stay home from school, so for Monday and Tuesday I got to walk with her cool older skater boy, it was the 90s, okay, to school, and maybe I had a bit of a crush since I was so young and didn't know any better. We lived in a building with an entrance and a small alleyway leading to a quieter residential boulevard in Barcelona back then, and we'd walk along the boulevard to the nearest bus stop, which was a good 15 minutes away. Wednesday morning we left a little earlier because I had volleyball practice, and he still walked me anyway. It was a beautiful day, sunny, warm, 30 degrees Celsius, near Easter long weekend. Catholic school gave us the week off because religion or something, and then there was nothing wrong with the day, I thought. Back then, because I doubt anyone's familiar with the city, there weren't things between the road, the parking spaces off the road, and the sidewalk like there are now. So I don't really remember how it happened, but one minute we were walking along and talking about how Barca, his team, sucks, and the next thing I knew, I was face down in the street, dead, and in a lot of pain and all wet. My leg had been clipped by an old Ford Mustang when he pushed me out of the way. The drunk driver had driven across an opening in the boulevard through the opposite two lanes, past the parking spaces and into the opposite sidewalk. My friend's brother had been hit and thrown over the Mustang because he had no chance to move after pushing me out of the way, and he took it head on. The Mustang hit him, went through a phone booth, and was pinned to a fire hydrant. I remember this intense pain in my leg and all over my torso, and I tried to get up as hard as I could and go to him, but I couldn't feel or move my leg. So crying in pain and confusion, I'm sure I called out to him and dragged myself across the road to him, and he wasn't moving because it was just after 5:30 in the morning. There wasn't anyone else in the street, and no one seemed awake and was looking down into the street. Now, a 6-year-old trying to drag a 13-year-old you'd think wouldn't go over well with a dodgy leg, but somehow I managed to drag him near enough what was left of the phone booth to try and call for help, but I was obviously in shock, and well, it didn't register that a half-destroyed phone booth wouldn't work. I don't know how long I tried calling for help until our bus happened to drive by and the driver stopped and came to help. He obviously called for help because the next thing I remember is being taken by an ambulance to A&E, and I kept thinking that we were siblings because I must have kept telling him I have to call our sister instead of his sister. Somehow I remember her number, I guess because back then we didn't have smartphones and had to write numbers down in our diaries, and called her parents from a hospital bed and told his mom that he had gotten killed. Obviously an injured 6-year-old can't really comprehend things all that well, but I later found out that I told her I got him run over and that there was blood everywhere and he wouldn't wake up. He was already in theater by then. She then called my grandmother, who raised my sister and I when our parents traveled for work, but because Gran was older, she was still asleep and didn't have her hearing aid in. So I just remember being in a bed when his family arrived and they fussed over me and told me to stop apologizing, and the look on my friend's face, sick, still half asleep, crying, and she just kind of looked at me, then climbed up painfully on the bed and hugged me and cried. I'll never forget the look on her face when she walked into the hospital. Story 30. I had to call my grandpa to tell him to drive 6 hours alone down to my family because my dad was going to finally lose his battle to cancer. The day I called him was the anniversary of his second wife's death. The day before was the anniversary of his first marriage. His first wife died after 24 years. My dad was 22 at the time from breast cancer. He remarried about 10 years later and was married for 30 years to the woman who I knew as my grandma. She died about 2 years after a car accident, which led to various health problems and complications. My dad, who was the healthiest person alive lifestyle-wise, had been battling cancer for over 15 years, and within the span of a month, went from perfectly fine to at home on oxygen to into the ICU for his final days. I remember sitting in the ICU with my grandpa, both watching my unconscious father have seizures and chatting with him about life. He told me that he doesn't think he can handle much more loss and hopes that he's next. That kind of tore my heart out because he's such a great guy, and this is all while I sat there missing finals in college watching my life role model die in front of me. It's been almost 2 years since my dad passed, and my grandpa is still doing well. 2 more of his siblings have died since then, unfortunately. That man has seen so much loss, and all of it was bedside in the hospital. 2 wives, his son, and 4 of his 5 siblings. I can't imagine how he survives. I'm going to call him now. Story 31. That mother of 2 small children just gave 38,000 euros, about $42,500 as of June 2019, to random Ukrainian scammer. Now the story. I'm an engineer at Atomic Research Lab. About 5 years ago, for almost 2 years, I've worked as a system administrator. And because of that fact, I'm still a computer guy for a lot of my friends and their friends. And one day this girl calls me, asking if I can help her with stuck money transfer. I said, why not? Thinking that maybe she bought something and shop didn't receive payment or just made a mistake somewhere. Boy, was I wrong. When I arrived at her place and she started telling me about this perfect place for investing, that she made about 200,000 euros in just 3 weeks, but something went wrong and her commission payment was not received by the system and she cannot receive her earned money, what I found, she invested 20k euros at the beginning. I don't know what she was thinking or who told her to do that. Then this money grew for 3 weeks until they reached 200,000 and she tried to take them. System said that she had to pay commission fee, which was about 10k. She paid it out, but then the system just added this money to her account balance and nothing happened. She contacted tech support. It was a guy named Andy, and they communicated by Skype. He told her that maybe there was a bug and she needed to pay another fee, but because of a bug, the fee was smaller, only 8,000. She paid. This Andy disappeared, and then she called me. Site was made and registered by some Ukrainian company. Registrant's first name was also Andy. In the license agreement, it was clearly said that site was just some random blinking numbers, that they do not guarantee anything and are not responsible for the bugs on the site, and all the transfers were in Bitcoin. I've tried to trace this Bitcoin wallet, but after 4 or 5 transfers, it went to money wash service. So the best I could say to her at that moment was the truth and call the police to register money theft. Story 32. I'm a leader in the military and am young for the responsibility I have. So I have had to grow up really quick and learn to be mature when it's required of me. So to start, one of my soldiers tried, unsuccessfully, to unalive himself twice in a week. My branch of the military only requires notification of the next of kin, who was his estranged wife. The wife did not have a good relationship with the family and was not going to notify them. Now in my personal life, my sister has attempted and my grandfather succeeded in their attempts at self-unaliving. So I've seen and felt how it affects the family. I also would be crushed if no one had told me my child had attempted to take their own life. So someone got the numbers for his mom and dad, but didn't feel comfortable making the call themselves. I called both the mom and father. They were divorced and explained the situation. It didn't hit me until the next day when I called my own parents and I cried like a baby on the phone with them. If you have a friend or coworker or family member with self-destructive behavior, talk to them and try to convince them to get professional help. You may just avoid this situation altogether. Story 33. I'm 50 years old and have been battling chronic health issues for over half of my life. Opiate pain medication allows me to work, be a wife, a mother, etc. Basically, live my life. A few years ago, my family doctor told his handful of pain patients that he wanted to retire. Then he referred us to pain management programs. I was turned down by 6 different providers, all saying they could do nothing to help me. When the CDC made guidelines years ago for how many mg a day a patient should take, they didn't take a long-term patients into consideration. Doctors took those numbers as gospel, too scared of losing their licenses for not complying with the guideline. After being turned down so much and knowing the reality of what was coming, I made a decision. I refused to go back to a life of pre-pain control where I lived my life on a sofa and never did more than sleep, eat, watch TV, and surf the web. That's not living. I sat my family down and told them that I decided that if things started going backwards a bit, I'd travel to a state where assisted self-unaliving was possible and just end it there. I watched my daughter fall to pieces in front of me, begging me not to do it. It broke my heart that the medical providers I trusted had turned their backs on so many legitimate patients due to fear-mongering and the belief that the opiate crisis was because of long-term pain patients. I promised my daughter that I'd go down fighting, but if the time came, my mind was made up. Afterwards, I found out that none of my doctor's pain patients were accepted elsewhere. Pain clinics are taking those who need procedures, which pay big and have no long-term risk, like epidurals for back pain and nerve blocks. He's decided not to retire for now. Meanwhile, so many long-term patients have unalived themselves due to being cut off suddenly instead of safely tapered to a lower dose. The amount of pain scripts being written have cut drastically, yet the crisis continues. The CDC has quietly said that they didn't mean those severe number drops for long-term patients, yet everyone still runs with OMG, opiates bad. The politicians never have to tell their families that they will willingly choose death over agony. Story 34. This actually happened to my mom, but I was the one she was telling the horrible news to. I was 12 years old. My mom was a volunteer victims advocate. She would get called out, often in the middle of the night, to assist the police with victim support. Police are often very busy interviewing witnesses and more often don't have the time to provide emotional support for victims and families. This is where my mom would step in to help. The hardest calls were the ones with parents who had witnessed the death of a child. One late evening, I see my mom rushing out the door. She didn't have time to change from her work clothes, and I could tell from the way she was rushing that it was bad. I didn't see her again until the next morning. She knocked on my door, and as I was getting ready for school, I opened the door, and I could see there were fresh tears running down her cheeks. All she could say before sobbing was, "Nick died last night. I'm so sorry." I knew right away she was talking about my childhood friend. I would find out in the days that followed that he was struck by a car while riding his bike across the rural highway. His mom lost her only child that night. I lost one of my best friends. I still think about Nick a lot. I named my first son after him. He was such a class clown and the nicest kid to everyone. I miss you, Nick. Story 35. My mom was 73 years old. However, she did not act or look 73. She was extremely independent and traveled all the time in her retirement. One day she fell in a parking lot and hurt her knee, so she was taken to the ER and they ended up doing an MRI on her head to see if there was any reason that she fell, as she had no idea why it happened. I met my mom at the ER just as the doctor came into the room and told my mom that she had 3 abnormal masses on her brain, and they felt like, given the look of them, that they were most likely cancer. They admitted her to the hospital while more tests were run. Every day she would seem a little less than herself as the tumors grew inside her brain. Eventually, in less than a week, she would start having trouble identifying anyone that wasn't close family. When the results of the biopsy came back, the doctor pulled me aside and told me the cancer had metastasized and it was a type of cancer that moved quickly, and at her age, there were really no options for treatment. I had to tell my mom that she had brain cancer and would never leave the hospital. She died 22 days after she first showed up in the ER. I had to tell my siblings and all other family members, which really sucked, but telling my mom that she was at death's doorstep was the hardest thing I've ever done. My mom was an RN for over 50 years. She was very knowledgeable with medicine in general, but had also spent a lot of time in a neurosurgical unit. Once I told her that the tumors were cancer and they had metastasized, she looked at me and said, "I know." I think she had figured it out very early on. She died on December 1st, 2017. I still miss her every day. Story 36. Telling my dad his mother died. She went into hospice 3 years before she passed. When she went, they expected her to live 3 months, but it runs in our family to exceed expectations. She had really bad dementia, and every time we visited her, she could speak and recognize less and less. My dad and I would visit her over spring break, as we lived in another state about 1,000 miles away. I watched my father and his sister grasp at straws they called recognition in my grandmother's eyes, and even though I wanted to do the same, I couldn't. Towards the end, it was almost unbearable to see her condition. She was physically atrophied and mentally gone. When I graduated high school, I ended up going to college in the same city where I had some family, and near the town where my grandmother's nursing home was. I didn't have a car, but I made it over there at least 3 or 4 times a month by bumming rides from people that I met. I would sing her songs and read to her and do my best not to cry. The last day is still to this day one of the worst times of my life. My uncle had posted on the family Facebook page that they didn't think she would make it. I called my parents and told them because I knew they didn't check their computers that early in the morning. It was hard to tell them, but I did it. Dad was going to hop on the first flight to us. My uncle then came and picked me up and we went to the nursing home. All the family in town was there for last rites, which was beautiful, even though I'm not religious. After a while, most of them left to go eat and shower and sleep. It was getting late after all. It was just my aunt and I left. My aunt cried, not wanting her mother to die alone. I promised her I would stay all night if I had to. I was the youngest. I could do it. We ended up not needing all night. We sang songs and read storybooks. I was singing Somewhere Over the Rainbow as I watched my grandmother take her last breath. My aunt was devastated, so I did what I had to do. I started calling people. My dad hadn't made it in time. He was in the airport when I called him. I think he knew when he picked up what I was going to say. I then called my mom and sister, my cousins and aunts and uncles, while the aunt that was there dealt with nursing home people. It was the most heartbreaking moment of my life. Thinking about it now still makes me cry a bit. Story 37. I had to tell my wife that her father had died on the operating table when her brother called me so I could tell her. We saw him right before his surgery, early that morning, and it wasn't expected to be anything but routine. So I had made an appointment of my own at the VA hospital for a test and scan to see if I had prostate cancer, which my VA doctor indicated was a real possibility from a previous exam. The VA hospital is a 90-minute drive from the civilian hospital my father-in-law was having surgery. We get to the VA hospital and I check in for my appointment. We were early and just had to wait till my name was called. It was weird because my wife received a call saying the surgery isn't going well and the family needs to be there ASAP. I go to the counter to tell them I need to leave, and the technician comes out from the testing area and calls my name just as the clerk is responding to me. I apologized for leaving suddenly but assured them it was a family emergency. We start the 90-minute drive back, and I'm not exactly doing the speed limit, but time is of the essence. Halfway back to the hospital my wife's father is having surgery in, my phone rings again. It's the youngest brother-in-law telling me that my wife's dad has passed, and could I please break the news to my wife. I pull over to the shoulder and break the news. I have few regrets in life, but my wife being absent when their father died is one I will forever feel guilty about. I know some members of her family were mystified why we left to go so far away on that day, especially her mother. My wife told the family about the VA suspecting I might have cancer, and I had postponed appointments so we could help her mom and dad get to and from his appointments leading up to his surgery. But we waited several months on appointments to align. It was all a waste of time. There was no cancer, just a false alarm. Story 38. This was 2 instances. Both happened about 3 months apart around a year ago. Not sure it stacks up to some of these, but it's rough for me. We had 2 dogs who were 15 and 17 respectively, and had been around my sister her whole life. One night the 15-year-old started to be disoriented and seize off, and on me and mom, and knew he was dying but my sister was asleep. She loved that dog with all her heart, and when he stopped seizing I had to go and wake her and tell her that we were going to have to go put him down because he wasn't able to hold his head up without help, and that if she wanted to say goodbye while he was still lucid, she had to do it now. She came and sat with him, holding him for about an hour while he was fine. It made him happy. Then he started to seize again, and it didn't stop, so we took him in the middle of the night to the emergency vet, and they did it there. About 3 months later, the 17-year-old, who I got in kindergarten, laid down with mom and was ready to die. But she was going peacefully. Mom got me because that dog was my life, and I laid with her for a minute when mom went to work. As soon as the dog realized mom was gone and I was alone, she started fighting death and wouldn't let go. I laid with her all night, and she was just holding on. Mom gets home early the next morning and says hi to her. I was sitting in a rocking chair with her, and not 10 minutes after she smelled mom, she was blind, she was gone. Just fell asleep and didn't wake. I had to tell my sister, again, when I picked her up from school that she had died. I still cry about her from time to time because we literally grew up together, and her last act was to make sure I wasn't alone. But I'm comforted to a degree by the fact that she lived a happy life and a long life, and that's exactly how she would have wanted to go, me rocking her to sleep. Anyway, I'm getting off track and emotional, but those 2 things are the hardest things I've ever had to do in my life. Story 39. My mom had stage 4 breast cancer, and she was dying in the hospital. My family, grandma, and my aunts and brothers all decided to go home for the night after the hospital and told them that they'd call hospice in the next morning. I decided to spend the night with my mom in the hospital so that if something happened, I would be there. I was sleeping in the waiting room when one of the doctors came out and woke me up. It was about 7:30 at the time. I don't remember exactly what was said because I was in a sleep fog, but he pretty much said that she wasn't going to live for much longer and that I needed to call my family and get them to the hospital. I'll never forget, I said, "Well, they're all coming to meet with hospice at 900. He laughed and said, "Yeah, she's not going to make it that long." So I went in to check on her and then went back out into the waiting room and called my aunt and my grandma and told them that, hey, you need to get up here now. My brother had stayed the night with me. I was upset at him because he decided the night before to go get really drunk and really high with his friends and then come back to the hospital whacked out of his effing gourd and stay the night. After I'd called everyone, he said, "I'm going to get some coffee and smoke a cigarette." I was like, whatever. My mom was a CNA while I was growing up. My girlfriend at the time was a medical lab tech. Her mom was a medical lab tech. Her stepdad was an RN. And at some point, I remembered that one of them had told me that even though they're out of it, there's a good chance they'll hear you, and that sometimes you have to give them permission to let go. While my bro was outside, I went in to check on my mom, and she looked horrible. I knew it was time. I said to her, "Mom, I know you're hurting, and I know it's time. If you need to go, I understand. I just want you to know that I love you, and it's okay." Less than 90 seconds later, she passed away. I went out and I got the nurse to let them know she passed and went into the waiting room. My brother was just coming back up from his smoke and was going to walk back to the area where my mom was, and I stopped him. I told him she had passed and he lost it. So I finally lose it because he lost it. Once I compose myself, I get on the phone and I call my aunts and uncles and my grandma and let them know that my mom had passed. All phone calls I broke down after. I told them the news, and hearing them break down. Then I'd recompose myself and make the next one. I think when I gave my mom permission to go, she took it. And I think part of why she did it with just me in the room is because she knew I could handle it. The worst part was my family. They were all in denial, like she was going to pull through this and be okay. I flew back from across the country, and as soon as I saw her, I knew she didn't have long to go. I had spent Christmas with her just 6 months earlier, knowing that she wasn't going to live much longer. The crazy thing was, before I had spent Christmas with her, her cancer had been upgraded from stage 3 to stage 4, and I knew it was bound to happen. For some reason, my family thought she was still in stage 3 for some reason, even though I know she told them she'd been upgraded to stage 4. Denial is a powerful thing, and seeing my family have it really made me frustrated. Story 40. Not me, but I could tell this was the hardest news for him to break. After my mother left us, my uncle moved in with my dad, sister, and I. He had many medical complications and couldn't work and frequently wore bandages and moved around the house slowly, so we affectionately called him Uncle Mommy. He wasn't my dad's brother by blood. They were childhood friends since they were 12, I want to say, maybe younger. It was supposed to be temporary, but he ended up staying and helping raise my sister and I for over a decade. And then his depression and medical needs got to be too much for him. He'd always had an issue with alcohol, but as a diabetic, he seemed to always keep an eye on it, and it wasn't unusual for him to hide away in his room for days on end. But this last time, he drank too much and just never woke up. His depression had been affecting the family, so my dad finally barged in after 3 days to see him laying there, and he said to me that standing in the doorway, he knew he found his brother dead. What followed was a 911 call and an investigation to be sure no one had killed him. As he waited for police and ambulances, he had to tell my sister. After the body was removed and foul play was no longer suspected, he called my uncle's mother and then called his own mother. They all gathered at my doorstep and invited themselves in, which wasn't unusual, but everyone's greetings just reeked of wrong and forced. It wasn't how my family behaved. When they finally all came inside, I demanded to know what was wrong. What happened? They all looked to my dad hopelessly. I could see my soft, loving, caring father steel himself to deliver the news to me. The last person he had to stay strong for, he held my shoulders and said the words that still haunt my memories. "Uncle Joel is dead." I collapsed and immediately fell apart. He was like a second father to me, but the look on my dad's face was that of a broken man, one that knew this was the last time. He knew he didn't have to stay strong anymore, and my family collectively lost their strength, and I don't think I've ever heard a more mournful sound. I know my dad still blames himself for not checking on him sooner. I know my uncle's mother blames him as well, and I don't think it's something they'll ever get through. My dad's face is different now. Usually my dad is a big old teddy bear with an insanely youthful look and energy about him. Now he has the first signs of age around his eyes, and I can see the light in his eyes have dimmed ever so slightly, especially whenever any Rush song comes on. Rush was my uncle's favorite band ever since they heard them as kids. It's what they bonded over. Story 41. My best friend of my whole life, we'll call him Brandon, was in the army and was stationed in Germany for a while and had made a lot of friends there. One of the friends he made was actually an American who had become a German citizen. They hung out a lot and went on lots of trips together, going to European music festivals and stuff. Through Brandon, I myself became internet acquaintances with this person. The two ended up having a falling out and never spoke to each other again. Eventually, Brandon was sent to Afghanistan for a few months, where he apparently was put through some heavy crap. Although he never told me about it, he came back home in November to visit, and something seemed really off about him. In January of the following year, I received a call that he had unalived himself in his room on base. I was in hysterics for weeks, waking up just crying and miserable all the time, barely having any will to live. But after a couple of days, it became apparent that no one had told any of his friends in Germany what happened, and since I was the only one who had any connection with them, it seemed most appropriate that I tell them. I've never had to break any news like that to someone before, and being absolutely distraught while trying to answer questions that I didn't have answers to was hard. Story 42. Not me, but my mom. But she had ran into my room after school. We just got home. I said hi to my cat I've had since I was 6. I was about to turn 15, and then went inside, and not even a few seconds in, my mom came running into my room screaming that my dad accidentally ran her over. He didn't completely run her over, but enough to where she walked over to a bush. My dad follows her, running, and she dies in his arms. Basically, I got handed my cat's limp body. Her eyes were wide, and all you could see was just black, no blue. The cat had beautiful blue eyes, and I just petted her corpse and had my face in her fur, crying and screaming. Basically, my dad killed my cat accidentally. When he buried her, I was the one to put her in, and I just held her like a baby and placed her in there gently, and I curled her up like she was sleeping. I then broke down into tears, and so did everyone else, and then we had buried her. My dad then isolated himself from me for a whole week because of what happened. Worst thing was, I had school photos the next day, and I was just crying through them, and I was forced to get my photo taken with everyone else, and I was just silently crying. He loved my cat very much, and he still can't forgive himself for what he did. But me? I've forgiven him, and instantly did, but it truly did hurt me for a while. But I have a painting of a cat wearing a flower crown that looks exactly like her. And I love you, Allie. I miss you, pretty girl. That's the nickname we give her. Story 43. Mexico, 2010. I was walking to a friend's house when we saw a Nissan Tucson park outside of his house, which was also a store. I had a terrible feeling, and I hid in a random person's garage. I decided to peek a little and saw 2 hitmen get out of their car with an AK-47 each and enter the store. I heard gunshots for the longest minute of my life. When they left, they were out of sight. I ran to the store and saw my friend and a customer laying dead on the floor. 2 of my other friends arrived almost immediately. It was hard to tell his mom when she arrived an hour later. His father was out of town and took some time for him to get there. I have to mention this happened a week before Christmas at 2 p.m. I was 15 at the time and he was 19. My friends decided to keep me away from everybody, including the cops, because I was so young. Most of my friends are way older than me. It took the paramedics half an hour to arrive. It's a small city that only takes 10 minutes to cross from side to side. The military arrived almost right behind them, and 4 police trucks got there about an hour after the incident. After they left, the parents wanted to talk to me. It was hard to look at them in the eye and tell them what had happened. They also kept me out of everything. The mom thanked me and gave me a hug. His father told me he wanted to see me at his house in 2 days. We didn't mourn him. We had a 3-day booze-filled party in his honor, with his body present. After the burial, we continued to celebrate his life, and it was heartbreaking and warming at the same time. Story 44. No one will probably read this, but here's my story. At 3:30 a.m., my grandfather called me to tell me my Nana had passed away. He then asked me to call my sister and let her know. It was the worst sentence that has ever come out of my mouth. Courtney, Nana's gone. She'd been battling cancer for 15 years. She won 2 rounds with breast cancer, but then it came back in her bones. She was stage 4 in just 2 months. It was hard. She got tired of trying to fight it, and she left us in 2 weeks after she stopped treatment. I'm not religious, but if there is a God, then cancer is Satan. It is the hardest thing to watch someone go through. No matter how much you wish you could take even 10% of their pain, you are completely helpless. Even though I wanted to bawl my eyes out every time I saw her in that last month. You have to hide it. You have to be strong for them. When she hugged me, my tears dripped down my face. I wouldn't let her go until I could wipe my eyes. For anyone out there, either experiencing cancer firsthand or watching or helping someone in your family who has it, I wish you the best. I truly hope it all works out. I'm with you. Everyone else is with you. I love you. Please know this is just a chapter in your life, and it will be better. Story 45. About 20 years ago, my dad didn't have a phone or working phone or service for some reason. Don't remember why, so there was really no way to reach him remotely. So my uncle called my mom, his ex-wife, and me, 14 at the time, to tell us the bad news. We had to drive to his house in the middle of the night to tell him his mom had suddenly died. He almost collapsed when we told him. We left after consoling him for a few minutes. He and my mom did not have a good relationship, so it was awkward, and then we went home. He called about a half hour later from a payphone and could hardly get any words out through his tears, as my grandfather was pretty hard on him as a kid and he had a strong bond with my grandmother, so it hit him extra hard. That was one of the worst nights of my life. The silver lining was that he rekindled a relationship with my half-brother and sister from his first marriage at the funeral. At the time, he hadn't seen or talked to them in 20-something years, and they have a pretty good relationship today. Story 46. Received a frantic phone call one night from my sister-in-law's grandpa's number. It was my sister-in-law's aunt, screaming hysterically, crying, trying to suck in any oxygen she could muster. "He's not breathing. Daddy isn't breathing." My sister-in-law was out with my brother and they were just getting home. I ran the phone to my mom and had her talk to the Cakers. That's what we call her aunt. My mom had to scream into the phone to tell her to hang up and call 911. Meanwhile, I caught my brother at the door and told him about the call. He sat down the groceries and immediately turned back towards his wife. I feel she knew from the look on his face. She dropped everything and started sobbing. He carried her in to call her aunt back. My mom was losing it from the heartbreak around us. My brother broke the news to his kids, who then surrounded their mom and held her. I went outside and picked up the groceries and put things away. It was just a really hectic and surreal situation. It was sad, but I feel he knew it was coming. He had stage 4 COPD. He had buried his dog the day before. I guess he had gotten up, went outside, and peed off his balcony. Cakers heard what was going on and shouted, "Daddy, you have a perfectly good toilet for that." And he responded by telling her, "It's my property. I'll pee where I please." He sat back down on the couch and just stopped breathing. The old fart stuck around long enough for his dog and then made his exit. Story 47. I was a nurse assistant at the time and we had discharged a patient. He was readmitted the next day for sepsis and he was not doing so good. The only family he had there was his daughter. She was of no blood relation, but he wasn't on good terms with his family. 6 a.m. rolls around and he starts to slip away. Code Blue is called and his daughter is freaking out. She was hysterically crying and I chose to comfort her while the team worked to try and save him. The nurse came out at one point and delicately told her the code was not going well and rushed back. Shakily, she grabbed her phone, dialed a number, and shoved the phone at me. As it was ringing in between gasps for air, she said, "His family hates me. I need you to tell them he's going to die." And just like that, 3 phone calls happened and I told complete and total strangers their family member is in the middle of receiving life-saving measures and the outcome didn't look good. I'd never done anything like that before and I went in the bathroom and bawled like a little female dog until the rest of my shift was over. 15 minutes by the time the code was done. Story 48. My aunt lived in Mexico City and went through the 2017 mega earthquake. She suffered from fibromyalgia and many other health issues, having experienced this earthquake in her office located at the top of a high building left her terrified and even more ill. When she got home, her apartment building had some cracks, which made her even more scared. Government officials said it was okay to stay at. The next few days, she was in a terrible state of mind, though we only found out after her death. She would constantly call her friends to calm down from all her panic attacks. Unfortunately, days later, there was an aftershock while she was home, and she came out of her apartment, rushing down in a panic. The moment she made it to the streets, she told her neighbor she wasn't feeling well. They sat her down, but suddenly she just fell to the ground and passed away. Her daughter called me. She'd been told her mother was unconscious. I was on the phone with her till she arrived to her mom's side and discovered she was gone. It was a massive shock, but I had to go and tell my mom that her sister had passed away. She only knew the unconscious bit. I was so nervous. I kept crying and shaking. When I got to my mom's house, I stepped in and she saw my red eyes and immediately knew. She made the most haunting scream I have ever heard. I absolutely hated to see my mom crying so desperately, and there was nothing I could do to comfort her. The photo of my aunt's body covered on the street kept showing up on the news feed as a major Mexican news outlet insisted on reporting about the 2 women who had passed from heart attacks that day. My mom wanted to get her sister to her home state so we could help her with her multiple health problems, but we couldn't. My poor mother lives with a lot of guilt for not being able to save her little sister. Story 49. The worst thing I've had to tell someone would probably be phoning to my mom to tell her I just got hit by a car. Wasn't bad enough that I needed to phone an ambulance right away. Mom phoned them anyway, still went to the hospital. Despite the accident not being anything too serious, other than a load of cuts and bruises and an awful headache, I'll never forget my mom crying by the side of the hospital bed. She told me she was crying so much because of how badly the accident could have gone and that she was scared for my life, despite me telling her it wasn't serious. Literally, the only thing keeping me around is the thought of how devastated my mother would be if I were to take my own life. Whenever I even think about taking my life, I always picture my mom crying besides the hospital bed, but 10 times worse. Reading these comments makes me thankful and grateful that's the worst thing I've ever had to tell someone. I've been lucky enough to not lose any immediate family in my 23 years on Earth. Story 50. Comparatively, not the hardest, but the hardest in my life. Last year and the year previous were really hard for me because I was in a 5+ year toxic relationship. I basically had to take off in the year previous to last. and for legal reasons, I was unable to talk to this guy whom I had a toxic relationship with. Last year, 4+ months went by of me blaming myself and hurting, and then when I finally began to better myself, I was able to talk to this guy again. But this time, I came with emotional support ammo. I had found a new boyfriend who drove up with me 2.5 hours to this guy's mom's place, and telling him the news was even harder, because while I was apart from this guy, his lung collapsed and sent me into a helpless panic. So when I saw him, I naturally asked about the surgery and saw his long scar that wrapped the side of his body. Shortly after, I sat down across from him and sent my new boyfriend outside so I could confront him. His mom had told him previously to move on, as I did, but I guess he wanted to hear it from me. So I drew it out slowly, uncertain to how he would react because of our super effed up and rocky past. I told him that the guy I was with out there is my new boyfriend, and that knowing how things ended up between us, that moving on meant we were broken up and that we were in a toxic relationship. It's really hard and really frustrating because that effort owed me a hefty lump sum. Story 51. I used to live on the same street as a woman named Rose. She was in her early 90s, small, about 5'2", and was one of those women who could still kick your butt without much effort. She was extremely feisty, cursed like a sailor, and since the day of my birth, she's been nothing but a grandmother to me. My father often helped her shovel her driveway in the winter, and we both visited her often in the summer. For years, running down the street to playfully annoy her was one of my favorite things, as well as playing with her stinky pup named Hope, who was nearly 15 years old, by the way. In around late 2012, something had vastly changed about her. She had started falling all of the time. However, her falling wasn't a complete surprise. She's fallen before and laughed about it, and we even often found new bruises with each visit. But she always dismissed it like she could handle it. Mind you, she could, but pride aside, she knew something wasn't right anymore. The minor trips and careless caution turned into uncontrollable slipping and unconscious falls, which would leave her on the floor for hours with no help. Soon after, we started finding out that she had been having back-to-back strokes, forming numerous blood clots, and her once mild dementia became very severe. She became more and more dependent on others, and she hated it almost as much as we hated seeing her health plummet. It was awful to watch this pillar of a woman fall apart. After a few short months, I saw her on her deathbed before my trip to Hawaii. Was invited to a wedding, and up until then, I never really felt the weight of what was happening to her until I watched her lay there, taking long and calm breaths. She still made an effort to squeeze whenever she felt her hand being held, and I told her I loved her before I made my leave. I was lucky enough to have it said back to me. I was lucky enough to have closure. A few days passed and I'm at the airport when finally I got the call. She passed away, and having to explain that to my other siblings and friends who had known her and not the situation was incredibly difficult. Oddly though, her biting attitude towards life just makes me laugh more than it makes me sad. She empowers me still. I aspire to be as brave and as kind as she once was to me. Story 52. Am a paramedic. I was maybe 2 years on the job working with a brand new EMT on Christmas Eve. We get a call for a middle-aged female having back pain around 1 a.m. We arrive on scene and she looks fine. Tells me it feels like a kidney stone. She's had one before. For craps and giggles, I put her on the cardiac monitor and she was having a massive heart attack. I look at her dead in the eyes and say, "I'm going to tell you something and you have to promise me you'll stay calm." She nods and I grab her hands and tell her she's having a heart attack, but I'm here and that you're in the back of an ambulance heading to a hospital who can fix as soon as we walk in the door. She survived. For the nerds, she had a almost 100% block of the LAD. Second one, a call for an unconscious male. We arrive and go into the basement bedroom and find a teenager laying in bed, DOA. He got sick, got prescribed cough syrup with codeine, and got home and went to bed. His stepfather went to check on him a few hours later and called 911. He lived with his mother and stepfather. His biological father shows up while we're there with the police and he sits down outside on the stoop. I kneel down and tell him, "I'm sorry, your son is dead." He tried to keep it together and then broke down. I had dreams about this moment for years, seeing this fully grown man break down in front of me, telling him his son was dead, and I couldn't do anything to help him. Story 53. USA. My wife's younger brother died in 2011 from a glioblastoma, stage 4 brain cancer. He died after only 8 months after being diagnosed. In October 2012, my wife, 58, suffered a grand mal seizure while out of town. She was given a head scan which showed a lesion behind her left ear in the speech center of her brain. She was a music teacher, so how cruel was that? After a biopsy, we were told it was an oligodendroglioma, or grade 2 brain cancer. Her prognosis, if I recall, was 5 to 8 years at the time. Devastating news. In November, she had a 95% of the tumor removed at a renowned cancer center in Boston. 2 days after Christmas, she had another massive grand mal seizure and spent 3 touch and go weeks in ICU. As she was about to be discharged to rehab, her neurosurgeon took me aside and told me the tumor had been misdiagnosed. It was actually a glioblastoma, stage 4, with a prognosis of 12 to 18 months. The exact same rare, aggressive brain tumor as her brother. I knew what the road ahead would look like and struggled with how I was going to tell her. Once she was doing better at rehab and a few days before her planned discharge, I told her. I sat down next to her on the bed, teary-eyed, and she asked what was wrong. I told her, and I lost it. She embraced me while I sobbed and cried, and she didn't shed a tear. She comforted me. That was without a doubt the hardest thing I've ever had to tell someone. She was a survivor for 36 months, doubling her prognosis. Cancer beat her in the end, but she handled her journey with the same grace and dignity she lived throughout her whole life. Cancer sucks. Story 54. I had to tell my stepson that his mother died. It turned out I only had to tell them there was an emergency, but this story has one heck of a twist. Read on. I learned from Facebook when his half-brother posted from his mom's account, "This is so-and-so. My mother died suddenly this week from an unknown heart condition. I miss you already, Mom. I can't believe you're gone. I love you." Knowing my stepson was estranged from her, I wanted to make sure he heard it from family and not from Facebook. So I'm begging him to take a break at work and either call me or his brother and not go on social media. I let him know it was an emergency, but was not about to tell him his mother died over text. He called his brother, and I felt good about that. After all, she was their mother. It's better he heard it from him than me. Where was his dad, you ask? We were separated at the moment, and he refused to deal with the situation at all. In his own way, he was mourning too. Didn't make me any less exasperated and upset by this becoming my responsibility. At the same time, I could not let our son learn this from social media. So I handled it as best as I could. I worried for months about my stepson, how he might suffer having never made up with his mom, who was my friend too, and I was mourning, and how that might haunt him. He's not an exceptionally talkative kid, especially about emotions. He was in his early 20s when this happened. I truly worried about how he was handling this. I didn't bring it up though, not wanting to cause him undue pain. A few years go by and he asks if he can come live with me, take a break from his hometown. Naturally, I say yes, the kid just needs to recharge his batteries and be around family for a few months. Once he's here, I ask how he's coping with the loss of his mom. He says, "Oh, I didn't tell you? Tell me what? My mom's not dead. She faked her own death to supposedly get out of a relationship. And the worst part? She stayed with the person to this day." I'm sorry, what? Yeah, I spent the next few weeks after my brother told me she died. You know the day you texted me and told me to either call you or him? Well, I started calling every hospital and morgue in the entire Southwest United States, and I couldn't locate her body. I figured I was going to give her a decent funeral. I mean, she's my mom and we were estranged, so I figured it was the least I could do, right? So I was starting to get suspicious when her body wasn't in the town in Arizona she lives in. By the time I covered basically all of Texas, I pretty much knew something was up. So I called my brother back and demanded the truth, which I finally got. He wouldn't answer my texts or calls for weeks, so I knew something was off. I think she enjoyed how hurt I was and how much I mourned her death. It's like she got a twofer. Her partner was destroyed, and the son who refused to speak to her was actually willing to pay for her frickin' funeral, and also cried his heart out at the news. How crazy is that? I'm just standing here with my jaw on the floor. Her death caused so many issues. There was all this drama surrounding the death of this woman. People really and truly mourned her, and she's just sitting back, soaking up all this attention her death caused. I can just picture her gulping down a cup of tears that my stepson cried. She's always been a drama queen, but this was so next level. I had a hard time wrapping my head around it. Once I finally got my brain to accept this epic level shenanigan, I looked at my stepson and said, "Well, look at it this way. You've already mourned her death. Literally anything she does from here on out, including truly dying, is already dealt with. You can now finally walk away for once and all and be done with it because you've kind of already dealt with it." He then mentioned his intention to forgive her. If he does, he's a better person than I am. I haven't forgiven her and have no intention of forgiving her. She may be alive, but she is quite dead to me. As anybody who can do that to their own child probably should be. Story 55. I am a chaplain in the U.S. Army Reserve. We typically join the casualty notification officer for a notification if there isn't an active duty chaplain in the region. A soldier from my town was on active duty and deployed. While deployed, his wife and the family came back to our town, and that was where the next of kin and emergency contact pointed them. We didn't get a name until right before, mostly due to older family regulations that predates social media so that the family can hear from the Army before anyone else. Right. So we get the address and then get the name of the family member. I noticed the last name was familiar but didn't know the first name, and it was a common enough last name, so I shook it off until we pulled up and the family saw us come in, and I saw my friend's mother and wife. I had never met the wife. We were close in middle school and started drifting halfway through high school. They all remembered me, and I remembered them. Heartbreakingly, his kid sister was there too, and she recognized me before I even got to the door. That was my very first casualty notification, and it was absolute hell. Story 56. I wasn't the one telling the news, but I was on the receiving end. My girlfriend and I, we're in an LDR, love to watch shows together, and the season finale of the show we love to watch was finally available. She was so excited, and we arranged a time to watch the episode before she went to get dinner. When the time came around, I sent her a couple of text messages just saying, "Hey hon, and I'm ready when you are." She read them but never responded, which is really weird because she always responds. I sent a couple more just saying, "Hey, I love you," and "Are you there, baby?" This was about 2 p.m. By the time 9 p.m. rolls around, I'm properly starting to freak out. I message her best friend who lives close by, and she said that she hadn't heard from my girlfriend all day long. Her friend said she was going to check on her in the morning. I went to bed feeling exhausted, but nothing would prepare me for what the morning looked like. I woke up to a huge paragraph text message from her best friend. It was very cryptic and wasn't really explaining anything, just that something horrible had happened. I called her best friend and she explained to me how she was SA'd by her stepfather last night. As I was talking to her in the background, I could hear my girlfriend crying hysterically. My heart physically hurt just hearing her best friend tell me the whole story and the fact that my girlfriend's parents weren't going to do anything about it. My girlfriend's parents thought it was okay that what he did, it's culturally okay where the stepfather is from Nigeria. Girlfriend's mom defends her stepfather the whole time and forced girlfriend not to say anything about it. This all happened about 5 days ago. The wounds are still fresh for her, and because her parents refused to do anything about what happened, girlfriend has decided to take legal action. And you bet that I'm going to be with her every step of the way. Story 57. My entire life I was different than my brother and my sister. They were both white and I am brown. I would ask my mom why that was, and she told me because we are part Native American. Mine just shows a little more. I would ask my dad, and he would say the same. Well, fast forward many years, and throughout those years, I would occasionally get drunk and ask again. My mom would always be so insulted and say things like, "How dare you accuse me of being unfaithful?" or "What are you trying to say about me?" I am so much like my dad that I kind of went with it and believed it. Until one day I took the Ancestry DNA test. Turns out I'm half Thai. I don't look at all like I am Asian, but I am half. I called my mom about it, and she gave me the same old crap. She eventually told me the truth. She said, "I guess I should tell your dad." But no, I wanted to do it because she had her chance. I called my dad to tell him. It was hard to say because I felt like I had done something wrong somehow, but I eventually tell him, and he says, "Huh, I always thought you were Mexican." I laughed and cried because he told me that he always knew but didn't want to treat me any different than my brother and sister. His choice was to love me. He later texted me that he was very proud of who I was and that all of his kids and I am most like him. I also found my biological dad, who had no idea I existed. I'm the spitting image of him. Oddly enough, I behave like him too. So in the end, I got 2 very awesome dads. Story 58. I am a 911 operator, and telling a complete stranger that they have a lost loved one has to be the hardest thing. Death notifications should always be done in person so we can gauge if that person will be alright. They may have anxiety or panic attacks sometimes, turn hostile, or want to self-unalive, or even just as simple as making sure they're not alone. The worst so far was just last year. The shift before me handled a head-on fatal accident, sedan versus semi. All the proper information was passed along at the shift exchange. About 30 minutes into my shift, I get a call from an older gentleman. concerned for his wife since she has not come home yet, attempting to report her as missing, says he's been driving every street he knows her to take home for over an hour. I gather the proper information from the gentleman, the name, date of birth, phone number, in case I have to ping the location, car type, plate number. After I gather the info, he wants to go back to searching, and I was to call him back if anything had changed. I don't know what prompted me, but I started with her name, then the plate number, which is an odd order for the search to go. No good info on the name. The state police had taken over the accident report, could not identify the driver at the time, and the vehicle was unrecognizable. I searched the plate to see that the multiple state troopers searched the plate all within minutes of each other, and my stomach dropped. I quickly contacted the state police dispatchers and confirmed my suspicion. The state police dispatchers confirmed they were looking for next of kin for the deceased, but had no knowledge of who family was, only had ID to go off of. I called the gentleman back, and per orders from the state and my supervisors, had to lie to this concerned husband. I had to tell them the troopers needed to speak with him at his home about finalizing the missing person report so he would return home. When the gentleman answered his phone, he was ecstatic, saying that we must have found his wife, and he knew it. He knew she would be okay. He was worried that he was going to lose the love of his life. As instructed, I had to tell the gentleman to return home. He pleaded with me, asking that we just finalize the missing persons without the silly paperwork so he could keep looking. Again, I instructed him to return home. Took a few more times even after that until he agreed, hung up the phone, and never spoke to the man again. My heart still hurts for this man. I completely understand why I had to lie. It was for his well-being, but that does not make it any easier. I got into the job to save people who were in need. Every part of me wanted to jump through this phone and hug this man. Found out later that his wife had a diabetic attack while driving home, which is what caused the accident, and she was the only injury or death. Story 59. My med school started a system during my last year when interns, final years, had to rotate, and every day one person had to hold a tiny little Nokia phone for 24 hours, and every time that phone got a text message, you'd have to run to whatever it told you to go. It was a code blue phone. We literally didn't do anything, and there was no point to it because all we were supposed to do was watch as the medical emergency team tried to resuscitate a person who was coded. So after the first few calls and we all got used to running to different parts of the hospital to watch people die, my third code blue day, I got to a room, and for the first time, it was a child. She was a tiny little thing, about 6 years old, and she had an autoimmune condition which made her incredibly susceptible to infections. They managed to resuscitate her, the first time at least. I got paged for her 4 times in the next 16 hours, and each time her family would see me running past them into the ICU as they screamed and wailed. The rest of the team was in surgical scrubs while I was in normal clothes, so they could easily distinguish me. At 3:02 a.m., she was declared dead. The rest of the team left via the ICU exit, but since I was not in scrubs, I had to leave via the common patient entrance. The child's mom, dad, brothers, aunts, and uncles were all huddled right outside, crying and weeping together. I had to walk past them, and the mom called out to me asking what was going on inside. The primary doctor was finishing up and getting the child prepped for the morgue, so she hadn't had the chance to tell the family yet. I was just a 23-year-old kid. I was lowest rung on the medical ladder, and I had absolutely no experience in telling patients bad news. I also knew it was absolutely not my place to tell them their child had died and that the primary doctor had to do it. So I turned and said, "The doctor will come out now, and she will tell you everything." And I tried to quickly walk away, but the mom must have seen it in my eyes because she absolutely broke down and whispered, "Why can't you tell us, doctor?" And I had to keep walking away, like I hadn't heard her and ignored her because I started crying. Rest in peace, Alona. Watching the team do CPR again and again on your tiny body was heartbreaking, and you changed my life in a way. I'm going to be a pediatrician because of you. Story 60. Called my mom to tell her that dad had passed away last night. My dad had an AML, acute myeloid leukemia. It happened quick. He started out with a toothache. He didn't have insurance, so he couldn't get it taken care of. He went to the ER at a local hospital, and the doctor there turned him away, saying, "Go to the dentist," which I guess at that point made sense. But he couldn't go to a dentist, so he tried to tough it out. He held on for a week, but got super tired and had a hard time keeping food down. He went back to the same ER, saying it was something else other than just a bad tooth. Again, the doctor turned him away, without even examining him. Another week goes by and he's bedridden. He hasn't eaten in days, he can barely get out of bed. A friend of the family comes by the house, sees him and says, "Nope, I'm taking him to the ER now." He goes back, can barely walk through the door this time. They take his blood pressure during the intake procedure and it's so low they are amazed he can even move at all. He's admitted immediately. The doctor who turned him away 3 times is going over his symptoms with him, and another doctor from oncology happens to be walking by and overhears the conversation. She immediately has him moved to floor 4, oncology. She has an idea what it is. A blood test confirms AML. AML has to be caught early. It works fast and is very deadly. Unfortunately, this was not caught in time. They start him on aggressive chemo, but it's not enough. My sister and I arrive in town and see him in the hospital. Everyone is still somewhat hopeful he'll pull through. He's hungry and talking. I smuggle in his favorite sandwich from McDonald's, a McFish. He gobbles it down with gusto. I watch a movie he's been wanting to see with him in the hospital room. Everything seems to be going well. I return to work. That day I get a call from my uncle. He passed away the night before. No one called me from the hospital. I had to call my mom and my sisters, and those were the hardest phone calls I ever had to make. It's entirely different when it's a member of your core family unit. I've had to break this kind of news before, but this was different. This post describes a violent event. Be aware before you read it. My significant other and I had to tell her kids, my stepkids, that their biological father committed self-unaliving. They were 7 and 9 at the time. He was an alcoholic and had been to jail for several DUIs. He got pulled over for what would have been another DUI with severe consequences. I'm not sure on the details, but I think it was 6 months in jail and a very long suspension of his license. When the cops approached his car, he pulled out his gun and unalived himself. Before we told the kids we researched the best way to do it, we decided to follow that advice and be as clear and as honest as possible. We initially tried to gloss over the self-unaliving part, but kids being kids, they asked a lot of questions. We told them the whole truth as we knew it. A few weeks later, we had drove to where he had lived with his parents for the funeral. They wanted to see his body, so we let them. We explained that it was like an empty house and he no longer lived there. The hardest part was our daughter did not want to leave and kept trying to hug and snuggle his body. After 30 minutes, we made her leave. 3 years and a bunch of counseling later, and the kids are thriving. They are able to talk about him in an open and honest way. Life was very flaky when they were growing up and sometimes would not see them for a year. He was still their dad and they loved each other. It was the hardest thing I have done, but we made the right decision by telling them everything. Story 62. Right, so back when I was like 12 or so, my mom and dad died in a car accident. So me and my 8-year-old brother had to go live in a foster home for a while. While we were there, me and my brother were always together and made another friend there. His name was Tyler. We always had each other's backs. But one day, one of the caretakers had me go in a room with the 2 other adults. They told me that me and my brother had been adopted to these people. Now, personally, I was excited. I wanted to have a nice home after all, so I excitedly ran to my brother who was hanging out with Tyler at the time, but that's when it dawned on me. I had to tell my brother that we had to leave Tyler, the only friend we made here, behind. Of course, it was hard for me to accept, but my brother took it even worse. He was shattered. He kept screaming at me to point where the caretaker was to try and calm him down. Tyler was there too. I looked over to him and he is straight up crying. He angrily runs away while my brother's being calmed down. The couple who wanted to adopt came over and told the caretaker to hurry and pack our things, which was kinda rude in hindsight. But of course, me and the caretaker packed everything, including my brother's things. When I came back to tell them we had to go, I could see hugging Tyler and sobbing. I wasn't going to rush them. It took about 8 minutes for my brother to finish hugging him and say goodbye to Tyler. One more time after that, and we left. Now, the new parents, they're great, and we have a lot of family trips. Even my brother is happy now. And on one trip to Disney World, he was bought a Winnie the Pooh plush and called it Tyler. He still has it to this day. And now what actually happened to the real Tyler, I can't say. But I know me and my brother hope that he is having the time of his life right now. Story 63. I didn't have to tell anyone, but when I was told my grandma died, I walked through the door, and when I was 14, my dad was home and from work early. I gave him a puzzled look, and he just said, "They found Grandma." And that's all he had to say. I knew what he meant. My grandma was starting to develop dementia. She lived alone and was paranoid that neighborhood teenagers were breaking into her house and moving her things around. We told her it didn't make sense, and she was adamant and demanded her locks be changed. She had 4 kids and 9 grandkids, plus many neighbors who checked on her multiple times a day. So my dad and his siblings gave in, and they changed her locks. But this meant no one had a spare anymore. So a week or two after her locks got changed, my aunt tried calling her to remind her to wake up in the morning, but no answer. She called an hour later thinking she had slept in. No answer. Waiting another half an hour, maybe she was in the bathroom. No answer. My aunt went to her house and knocked. No answer. Knocked on the kitchen window, the basement door. No answer. So she went down by the basement window and threw a rock to break it. But there was so much glass she couldn't climb in, so she had to call 911. The firemen went in, followed by the paramedics, and they found her in the back bedroom, forever sleeping. The weird thing was, though, she wasn't in her bed. She was in the old kid's bedroom, laying on the made bed, clutching a barely dim flashlight. We put the pieces together and assumed that she had heard a noise in the middle of the night, grabbed her flashlight, got up to look in the bedroom, and had a stroke. Got sleepy, laid down, and passed away. I offered to clean out the bedroom she died in because no one else wanted to, and it was a surprisingly peaceful experience. Story 64. I was a bystander to an insane car crash. Perpetrator was going 125 to 140 miles per hour in a large pickup, ran a red light, and slammed into a guy going across the road in a small blue sedan. Sedan guy was practically vaporized, and both cars were completely shredded. The pickup guy miraculously pulled through, made a recovery, and managed to flee before the court could process him. This is all hearsay, I don't know what actually happened. I stopped to call 911 right after the crash, and the cops asked me to explain the situation to them. I stick around and tell them what they need to know, etc. Right before I left, the man's mother showed up. She ran up to me and asked if I knew where her son was. I had to explain to her in the calmest and most polite way possible that there was no point in going to see her son because he was not only completely gone, but he was mangled in ways I couldn't imagine. I didn't want to willingly expose her to him. It seriously wasn't worth the mental scarring it would have given her. I went home and cried for maybe an hour and threw up a couple times, honestly. Crap was really effed up, man. I always hated it. But after that, impaired driving is seriously something I'm very hateful of. You can ruin somebody else's life in seconds because of your stupid mistake. Please don't do that to somebody. I didn't mention this before. I saw Coke bags in the pickup driver's car as I was pulling them out, and the guy definitely looked effed up on something. Story 65. My younger brother and I have different fathers. No biggie. Love is still love. Anyway, he was close to his dad, thankfully. And when he was 15, his dad got real sick. They lived about 100 miles away in a small town. His dad was airlifted to the hospital in my city as it was a university hospital and top-notch. I met them at the hospital that next morning and we went up to see him. He was in a bad way, but lucid and awake. He told us he loved us, and he told me to watch over my brother like a good brother does. To his credit, he always did treat me as his own, and I love him for that. A minute later, a nurse asked us to clear the room for a minute so she could clean him up. We stepped to the waiting room, and while my brother went downstairs to smoke a cigarette, my mom and I discussed getting lunch and went to let his dad know we just would be in the cafeteria and not leaving. But we walk in, and the nurse says she is so sorry as she walks out. And yeah, just like that, he passed. Apparently, he held on just long enough to say goodbye. My mom said, "Run downstairs and stop your brother from coming up." It killed me inside to go down, look him in the eye, and start crying because he knew. He had felt it. He knew it, and I confirmed it. But no one else could have, or should have. Story 66. Telling my younger brother, 17, that our mom, 40, was gone. She had a massive heart attack coming home from work. She was leaving early because earlier that evening, my brother and I came home to find our cat dying. I knew how long it took her to get home to the minute. I called and she didn't answer. After a few minutes, I jumped in the car and left him there in case she got there while I was gone. I ended up coming upon the wreck site, but she was already in an ambulance on the way to the hospital. I went there, and as soon as I got there, they told me she was gone. I had to wait about an hour for someone to bring him up there and just gave him a big hug and we left. We went home in a daze and waited on my father to get home. He worked out of town Monday through Thursday. I had called him earlier and told him to come home because my mom had a wreck, but I couldn't bear to tell him she had died. Not with him 3 hours away and driving like a madman already. I didn't know which would be worse, telling him or ignoring his many phone calls. I chose to ignore them and waited for him to get home. Today, oddly enough, would have been her 52nd birthday. Dad passed away about 5 years later from cancer, so it's just me and him now. The worst part was, after my dad kind of lost it for a few months, as we all did, Mom was our rock. So I felt I had to be strong for him since Dad couldn't. So I held my tears until I was in the shower or otherwise alone. I've had one parent die suddenly and the other slowly, and I can tell you, They both suck, but in different ways. Mom was hard because one morning she was there, and the next, no matter how many times I walked by her room, she just wasn't. Story 67. I've been a volunteer firefighter and medical responder for 15 years. My day job is a service manager for an AG dealership. I had taken my first actual vacation in 10 years last September. One of my best technicians, lived in another town, had a rough medical history and thought he had a heart attack Sunday evening at the end of my vacation. We talked Monday. Turns out it wasn't a heart attack. He would be released Tuesday and back to work Wednesday. Tuesday evening, got a phone call from a good friend who was on the fire department in that town. Not on shift that day, but overheard the call. It was to my tech's home. He said there was a self-unaliving there, but didn't know who it was. His dad lived in the same town and is also one of my technicians. So I called him. Expectedly, no answer. But a half hour later, he called me back. Probably the hardest question I've ever asked, having to ask his dad if it was him, if he'd done something bad. Unfortunately, he had. I immediately left home and drove there. This guy was always happy, playing pranks, telling jokes, just made the days fun. You never knew what to expect with him. He definitely kept things interesting, and he was dang good at his job, and with customers and people in general. We are all a family at work, and he was the big jokester. I lost my grandfather and my father last summer, 2 days apart. My mother lost her husband and her father. That was a difficult week for us, but telling my work family that Wednesday morning that he wouldn't be coming back to work, that was excruciating. Nobody was prepared for that. Heck, I wasn't prepared for that. The following Monday, our entire store closed up and went to his funeral. Our customers never questioned why we were closed for that period of time that day. Story 68. This probably isn't following the rules, as I was not the one who broke the news, but I had to receive the news. So if mods deem it worthy of being deleted, I understand. I was in year 2 of my Army career and was down in North Carolina, stationed in New York at the time, for training when my mom called me prior to one of my formations to let me know my grandma was in really rough shape and weren't sure how long she had. I had the choice to stay for training or go home, and elected to go home to be with my family. When I go to the airport the next morning, my mom called me to let me know she passed away and to put the phone up to her ear so I could say a couple words. The lady who was working at the USO noticed something was not going well for me, and when I told her, she gave me a hug and let me cry and said a small prayer for my family and I. It wasn't until a month or so ago when I was talking to my fiance about our wedding and sending invitations to the grandparents that I finally lost it. I looked up at my grandmother's profile on Facebook and just stared at the last picture of her that she posted and cried. I called my mom the next day to tell her how much I love her, missed grandma, and how hard it must have been for her to break the news. For all of you folks out there that have had the unfortunate experience of having to share the news of a passing loved one, I just want you to know how much you are all loved, how I cannot fathom the strength you have to be able to do that. I hope whatever deity you look up to blesses you accordingly, and you know that wherever our loved ones are, they love you no matter what. I miss you, Grandma. Story 69. Also, when I was 18, my grandmother, who raised me, designated me as her healthcare proxy, or whatever the terms were. Basically, doctors could share any information with me that they would with her, and in the event that she couldn't make her own decisions, I could choose for her. She was in relatively okay health, so I wasn't thinking too much about it when she went in for surgery for a blockage in her colon. I had to sit down with the doctors while she was being taken to recovery, and they told me that not only did they have to remove a large portion of her colon and she'd be waking up with a colostomy bag, they also informed me they found very late stage cancer that had spread so thoroughly they couldn't even be sure at the time where it had originated. She'd been living with it for years undetected. Her only symptoms up until the blockage were she got tired easily. Not a huge alarm when you're in your 70s, and her stomach would loudly growl frequently. It had spread to every single organ in her peritoneal cavity, and it would be impossible to remove. She had 2 to 3 months at best to live, maybe 6 months if she chose treatment over palliative care. I remember sitting in her hospital room, waiting for her to wake up, feeling sick to my stomach that I had to tell her everything when she woke up and was lucid enough to understand. The first thing she said when she woke up was, "They took my eyes." Super calmly and nonchalant, I just reminded her she had to open them. We started laughing, and I started sobbing, and she just let me cry. And when I calmed myself down, just said, "It's not good for me." I told her everything the doctor said, and she just asked me, How long? And I told her what they thought and just said, but what the heck do they know anyway? They don't know you like I do. She beat the odds as much as she could and lived for 2 years and 4 months after that day. And she tried to pack as much life into those days as she could. She was so feisty that it wasn't until after she passed and I was looking at photos that I realized how unrecognizable she had become from what she looked like before. Because on the inside, she was still the same old gravy. Story 71. I had to break the news to my group of Xbox friends about my friend, Jeffrey, self-unaliving, who was also in the close circle of lads. The group of Raiden Cosmos, as we called ourselves, had bonded over Xbox Live since before any of us had even hit puberty, so we experienced our teenage and middle school years together. Every day after our schools got out, we would grind Halo Reach until morning. Every day, we had a Snapchat group chat, where at 9:14 a.m. on February 4th, 2018, I had to tell everyone in our group about it. I broke down and said in a sobbing mumble, "He's gone. Jeff is dead. He really did it. I'm sorry, guys." Jeff and I lived near each other and went to the same school. We had been best friends ever since 6th grade. It came out of nowhere. Jeff had always been depressed, but never any attempts or threats. The Xbox gang, besides me and my friend, lived all across the country from each other, some being in Cali and others in Michigan and Wisconsin. Me and Jeff had been in Maryland our entire lives. All they could do was sit back, helplessly, and watch everything go down. From the moment of the news spreading to after the funeral, we had all been closer to Jeff than even some of his family. Due to distance and strict parents, the group wasn't allowed to his viewing or funeral. Over a year later, and I still haven't recovered. To anyone reading this, contemplating ending it all, my message to you is this. You will never know the full impact of your permanent decision. You can get through this, I promise you. You are strong. Story 72. Long read ahead, something I have never told anyone. My father had to take a voluntary retirement from Army because of a near-fatal accident in the hills that made his body 30% damaged. I was in middle school at the time. When I was ready to go to college, he used all his savings and even took out a loan to cover up for the fees. Being out of home for the first time, and that took in the hostel, the freedom had a bad effect on me. I got into drugs, started missing classes, started lying at home on the pretext of courses and trains for money, and eventually started failing entire semesters. My dad is not one of those strict Army guys, but has always loved me no matter what. I think he knew, but he always arranged for money. Here comes the difficult part. Each semester had 6 subjects. Until my 6th semester, I had failed in 20 plus subjects. To make things worse, I got into depression because of it and failed all the subjects in the 7th semester, which meant your parents had to be called in. I was so afraid and frightened to tell him that I had effed up my life that I couldn't sleep for 2 days. I somehow gathered courage, went home, and for the first time in my life told him everything, straight up and honest. Told him about the drugs, about the failures, and asked if I could continue college from home. I could see it broke his heart, and I saw a tear roll down his cheek. The man took a few minutes to process this. He stood up and said, "Do what you have to make it right. I am 100% with you, son." I think it was either his tears or that sentence. It filled me with so much shame and disgust over myself that I vowed to clear all exams in the next attempt, fought and slowly overcame withdrawal symptoms with the help of my dad and mom, had a miserable time, studied day and night because concentration power was gone, gave 18 exams in the 8th semester and passed 17 of them. It took me 1 extra semester to clear all the remaining exams. Fast forward 10 years, I am working with a global advertising agency, have been part of some of the biggest Indian ad campaigns, am earning decent money, have never consumed another drug ever since. Although I have a beer every once in a while, I know my limits now. I've never told anyone this, but today I want to tell everyone that I owe it to my parents, especially my father. Thank you, Dad, for saving me time and time again. Oh, that was a nice little change of pace. Happy ending. Don't get me wrong, these stories are great and it's filled with, love and loss and hope, but it's hard when you know that most of them end with goodbye. Story 73. My wife and I were really close to my mom. A few years ago, Mom collapsed at our home whilst baking with my nephew. When I found out, I rang my wife and I asked her to come home immediately, but didn't tell her why, as I didn't want her to panic and rush whilst driving. As my wife drove home, I got an update from my nephew that Mom had been unresponsive to CPR for 30 minutes, so the paramedics were taking her to the hospital. I realized at that point that Mom wasn't going to make it, but It didn't seem real. I was sitting on the stairs waiting when my wife got home. I tried to tell her what had happened, but could barely get the words out. With every syllable I said, my heart seemed to crack and break a little more. I'll never forget the look on her face as she realized what I was trying to say. It was a strange combination of shock, horror, grief, and pity. She ran to me and hugged me. I burst into tears and cried harder than I've ever done in my life. We raced to the hospital and got there just as they turned off life support, so I got to say goodbye as Mom passed away in front of us. Story 74. I elected to call my aunt to tell her that my father had passed away when I was 22. I remember wanting to do it, thinking maybe I would feel a bit better. Instead, it was incredibly traumatic. A few years ago, we live away from our home country. I had to ring my husband while he was away at sea to tell him his grandfather had passed. We hadn't been home in a few years and they were very, very close. But if you're familiar with these protocols, it's no easy task to call a ship that's at sea. To make a long story short, there were lots of people involved, and in the end, someone had to wake him up in the middle of the night to tell him, "Call your wife, it's urgent." And they took him to the phone and he called me, and he had no idea what in the world I was about to tell him. It could have been anything. It was a really terrible experience, and there was no resolution. He couldn't leave to be with me or his family or immediate or extended, and was unable to attend the funeral. So he basically had to endure it with his coworkers alone. I can't imagine how he must have felt. It makes me so sad to even think about it. Story 75. My friend, who is blind, had her husband die in front of her. A few days later, she fell in her home and was taken away by APS. Her home was deemed to be unsafe, and she was institutionalized as she was found to have no safe discharge. Going through finances, I found out that her husband had let the bills go for years, not days, not weeks, not months, but years. No taxes paid, no mortgage paid, all of their properties were in foreclosure, there was no money in the bank account, and the creditors were at the door. So I had to tell her not only was her home unsafe, but everything she owned was being seized and she had nowhere to go. But I've never seen someone so broken by one statement. A few months ago, she was finally discharged to Section 8 adult disabled housing. She asked if I could call the funeral home to collect her husband's ashes. 2 phone calls and I got to break the bad news to her that the funeral home had given his ashes to another relative, with whom she was not friendly because they hadn't been able to reach her. After all the bad news I've had to give her, you'd think she would hate me, but she tells me that I'm one of the only people she trusts 100% in this world anymore. Woo! We did it! You know what, as hard as it is, there's a certain beauty in the missing and the remembering. So if anyone else has some stories or comments that they would like to get off their chest, feel free to drop them down below and we can celebrate them and the memories that we have of them, even if it's hard sometimes. I know the whole video isn't supposed to be about death specifically, but that's kind of the turn that it took. But anyways, guys, thank you so much for tuning in and listening in. And yeah, have a wonderful day. I don't think I'm good at these outros.